It all started with a dream that sprouted on a quiet evening as I stood on my porch, staring at the empty lot beside my home. For years, it had been nothing but a patch of weeds, old stones, and wasted space. But in my mind, I saw something different. A charming little hotel, a boutique retreat for travelers looking for peace, scenery, and comfort. The idea felt wild at first. What would the neighbors say? What would the HOA think? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Our town had no cozy place for visitors to stay, and people often complained about long drives to the nearest inn. I had the land, the vision, and the drive to make something meaningful. So I started sketching. I spent nights poring over design ideas, checking zoning laws, and running cost estimates. I wasn't building some noisy resort. It was going to be tasteful, elegant, and small, blending perfectly with the neighborhood. A place that brought beauty, not chaos. I imagined ivy climbing the stone walls, soft lighting along the pathways, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the morning air. Little did I know that my dream would soon ignite a storm. The moment word spread about my plans, the HOA began to stir. What started as admiration from curious neighbors quickly turned into whispers, meetings, and watchful eyes. But in that moment, before all the trouble began, I felt unstoppable. I believed that with hard work and good faith, even a simple homeowner could create something extraordinary. I had no idea the fight that was waiting for me just beyond the blueprints. The lot had sat empty for over a decade, an overgrown patch of dirt that everyone ignored but everyone had an opinion about. To me, it wasn't just land, it was opportunity. When I first stepped onto it with my blueprint folder and measuring tape, I felt a thrill run through me. The wind carried the scent of pine and dust, and for the first time I could see it clearly. A 2-story boutique hotel with warm brick walls, wide windows, and a rooftop garden overlooking the hills. As I began clearing debris and marking the layout, neighbors would slow their walks, staring from across the street. Some smiled, curious about what I was up to. Others whispered behind hedges, their tones edged with suspicion. Still, I greeted everyone with a grin and explained my plan. A quiet, elegant space for travelers, nothing too big or noisy. Most nodded politely, but I could feel their uncertainty simmering underneath. By the second week, the HOA president herself, Margaret Willis, showed up. Her heels sank slightly into the soft dirt as she crossed her arms and eyed my sketches. "A hotel? Here?" she said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. I told her everything was above board. I'd checked zoning rules, permits, and business licenses. She gave me a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see about that," she murmured before walking off, clipboard in hand. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be easy. The land was mine, the vision was mine, but the HOA, oh, they believed the whole neighborhood belonged to them. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself Margaret was just curious. But that night, as I watched the sunset over the cleared ground where my dream would soon rise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a battlefield disguised as a neighborhood. The first morning of construction felt electric. The rumble of machinery echoed through the quiet streets, and the sun glinted off steel beams as if blessing the start of my dream. I'd hired a small, reputable crew, local workers who were just as excited as I was. The air buzzed with energy as the foundation was marked, concrete poured, and the first structure began to take shape. Every hammer strike felt like progress, every nail a step closer to something real. But the peace didn't last long. By the third day, the HOA had taken notice, and they weren't pleased. I spotted Margaret again, standing across the street with her arms folded, lips pursed, phone in hand. She wasn't alone this time. 2 other board members stood beside her, whispering, and pointing at the site as if we were building a military base, not a small hotel. Later that afternoon, the first letter appeared taped to my door. A notice of violation. According to them, I was in breach of HOA rules for unauthorized commercial construction and disrupting neighborhood harmony. The absurdity made me laugh out loud. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property's zoning. It was outside their power. But laughter quickly turned to irritation when I realized they were dead serious. The next morning, a stop work sign appeared on my construction gate, placed there by none other than Margaret herself. When I confronted her, she stood tall, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. "You can't just build whatever you want here," she snapped. "This is a residential community." I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "I've cleared everything with the city, Margaret. The permits are legal. You don't have authority over this." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." As she turned and walked away, the workers exchanged uneasy glances. I knew then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. The HOA wasn't going to stop me because of rules. They were going to fight me out of pride, control, and envy. That night, as I looked out at the half-built frame of my hotel glowing under floodlights, I made myself a promise. I'd finish what I started, no matter how many letters, threats, or fake violations they sent my way. By the next week, the HOA went from quietly annoyed to openly hostile. They called an emergency community meeting, plastering flyers on mailboxes and doorsteps, warning residents about the commercial threat endangering our neighborhood. The language was outrageous. Words like illegal development, property value destruction, and public safety hazard printed in bold. When I read one, I nearly laughed from disbelief. But when I saw how many neighbors actually showed up, whispering and frowning in confusion, my amusement turned to anger. That night, I attended the meeting myself. The room was packed, folding chairs lined up in the clubhouse, the air thick with gossip and tension. Margaret stood at the front like a queen on her throne, her HOA board seated behind her in matching polo shirts. When I entered, conversations fell silent. Every eye turned toward me. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice cold but rehearsed, "we're here to discuss your unauthorized construction project and the concerns it is causing in our community." "Unauthorized?" I said, holding up a folder full of city-stamped permits. "I've done everything by the book. The hotel is fully approved by the county and within zoning laws." Her smile was thin and sharp. "Perhaps legally, but this is a neighborhood association, and we have standards. A hotel brings traffic, noise, and strangers. That's not what our residents signed up for." The crowd murmured. Some nodded. Others looked uncomfortable. I caught the eye of my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Harris. She gave me a sympathetic smile. But before I could respond, Margaret continued, her tone rising. "We will be issuing fines daily until construction stops, and if necessary, we'll pursue legal action." I could feel my blood boil. "You don't have that authority," I said firmly. "You're overstepping your power." Margaret leaned forward, eyes glinting with challenge. "We'll see what the courts say." The meeting ended in chaos, people shouting, papers waving, and neighbors taking sides. As I walked out, I could hear the board whispering behind me, already plotting their next move. The battle lines were drawn, and the HOA had just declared all-out war. When I got home, another violation notice was already waiting in my mailbox. I didn't even bother to open it. I knew exactly what it said. The next few weeks felt like living under siege. Every morning, without fail, a fresh white envelope appeared in my mailbox, each one stamped with the bold red HOA logo like a mark of defiance. Inside were neatly typed violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. One claimed my construction site caused excessive dust and debris that endangered property values. Another accused me of operating a commercial enterprise without HOA consent, even though the HOA had no jurisdiction over zoning or business activity. They even went as far as citing me for visual disharmony. Apparently, the color of my temporary fencing did not complement community standards. It was absurd. I could practically hear Margaret's smug voice behind every line of bureaucratic nonsense. I stopped taking the letters seriously after the 10th one, but my workers didn't. Some grew nervous, worried that they'd get dragged into legal trouble. A few even quit after an HOA member showed up one morning, pretending to be a city inspector, snapping photos of their trucks and threatening fines. That was when I realized this wasn't just pettiness anymore. It was harassment. I decided to fight back. I organized all the letters, filed every one of them in a thick binder, and called my lawyer. When he read through them, he let out a low whistle. "They've really overplayed their hand," he said. "These are baseless threats. If they keep this up, you'll have a solid harassment and defamation case." But even with that reassurance, it wasn't easy. The HOA was relentless. They'd send their compliance officers to hover near the property line, clipboards in hand, pretending to take measurements. They'd stop guests and delivery drivers, asking invasive questions. They even called the city code office twice, hoping to catch me in some technical violation. But both times the inspectors confirmed everything was legal. One night I found tire marks in the dirt near my fence, as if someone had been snooping after dark. My stomach turned. It wasn't just about power anymore. They wanted to intimidate me, to make me quit before my dream could become real. But I wasn't backing down. I stood in front of the half-finished structure, concrete dust clinging to my boots, and looked up at the rising walls of my hotel. Every brick laid was a statement. Every hammer strike was defiance. If the HOA wanted a fight, they were going to get one, and I wasn't planning to lose. By the time the first inspection visit happened, I was already expecting it. The HOA had been hinting for days that they would bring in professionals to assess the extent of the damage my construction was supposedly causing. But when the black SUV pulled up one hot afternoon and two men in plain clothes stepped out, I knew right away. They weren't city officials. They were HOA board members trying to play government. They walked straight onto my property without so much as knocking. Clipboards in hand, sunglasses on, they started pacing around, snapping photos of the foundation and jotting notes. One of them, a tall guy with a bad attitude named Rick, started pointing at the workers and barking questions. "Do you have permits for this? Where's your safety compliance paperwork?" My foreman looked at me, uncertain. I dropped what I was doing and marched over. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. Rick smirked. "We're with the Homeowners Association. We're conducting an inspection of the property." "Then you should have brought a city inspector," I shot back. "Because the HOA doesn't have the right to step 1 foot past that fence." The second man, a nervous-looking one with a mustache, muttered something about community standards, but I was already pulling out my phone. I dialed my lawyer on speaker. "You might want to stay right there," I said to the two intruders, "because this call's being recorded." Within seconds, their confidence cracked. My lawyer's voice came through the speaker loud and clear. "Unless they have a city-issued warrant or a legal inspection notice, tell them to leave immediately. Otherwise, it's trespassing." Rick's smirk faded. He muttered something under his breath, shot me a glare, and motioned for his partner to leave. As they walked back to their SUV, Margaret's car turned the corner. She pulled up slowly, watching the entire thing from behind her tinted windows. When our eyes met, she didn't look angry. She looked furious. That night, I got an email from her directly. No HOA letterhead this time, just a single line. "You're making a big mistake. This will not end well for you." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of it. The HOA had gone from paperwork to personal threats, and that meant they were desperate. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had proof, I had the law, and most importantly, I had resolve. The next morning, I posted a large sign at the front of the site. "Private property. Trespassers will be reported." The workers cheered, and construction resumed stronger than ever. The hotel was halfway done now, its walls rising proudly against the sky. But deep down, I knew the HOA wasn't done. They were regrouping, planning their next strike. And when they came back, they wouldn't just bring clipboards. It was only a matter of time before the HOA pushed things too far, and when they did, it finally caught the attention of the town. The breaking point came one Monday morning when a city inspector actually did show up, this time legitimately. I was nervous for a split second, wondering if Margaret had somehow managed to twist things against me. But then the inspector smiled and said, "We've been getting a lot of complaints about your project, so I figured I'd come check for myself." The inspector, a calm man named Daniel Ruiz, walked the site with professionalism. He studied the foundation, checked my permits, and reviewed the paperwork. After about 20 minutes, he turned to me with a half smile. "Everything's clean," he said. "Perfectly within code. Whoever's filing those complaints doesn't know what they're talking about." I couldn't help but grin. "That'd be the HOA," I said. "They've been trying to shut me down since day one." He sighed. "Figures. You're not the first person they've tried to bully. But don't worry. I'll be filing an official report clearing your project of any violations." That same day, the city council caught wind of the situation after a local reporter wrote a short column titled, "HOA Targets Local Builder Over Legal Project." The story spread faster than wildfire. Suddenly, I was getting calls, not from lawyers, but from neighbors, business owners, even strangers. People thanking me for standing up to the HOA. Some had their own horror stories about Margaret and her board, unfair fines, intimidation, even threats to tow cars that were legally parked. The following week, the city held a public hearing to discuss the HOA's conduct. Margaret showed up in her usual power suit, trying to play the victim. "We were only acting in the best interest of our community," she declared to the council. But then, Daniel Ruiz stood up and read his report aloud. "No violations. All permits are valid. No construction codes breached. The HOA's repeated interference has no legal basis." The room erupted in murmurs. Margaret's composure cracked. Her face flushed red as she tried to interrupt, but the council chair silenced her with a single tap of the gavel. "Mrs. Willis," the chair said firmly, "the HOA's behavior has crossed the line into harassment. This will be investigated further." For the first time, I saw fear in Margaret's eyes. The woman who had tried to intimidate me now stood cornered in front of the entire town. When the hearing ended, several council members came over to shake my hand. "Keep building," one of them said. "We need more people like you who don't bow down to these HOA bullies." As I drove home that evening, the sun setting behind the rising skeleton of my hotel, I finally felt something I hadn't in weeks. Vindicated. But even as relief washed over me, I knew Margaret wasn't finished. She'd lost face in front of the town, and for someone like her, that kind of humiliation doesn't fade easily. The HOA's next move wouldn't come through official channels. It would come from the shadows. For a few blessed days after the council hearing, things went quiet. No letters, no trespassers, no HOA spies loitering around with clipboards. Construction moved smoothly. The walls were nearly complete, and for the first time in months, I could almost taste victory. But peace in my neighborhood never lasted long. And soon, the truth behind Margaret's crusade against my hotel began to surface. It started innocently enough, with a slip of the tongue. One afternoon, my contractor mentioned overhearing a heated conversation at the local cafe. Apparently, Margaret had been bragging to a friend about a new rental venture she was planning to start. "It'll be the best short-term stay in the area," she'd said, loud enough for the next table to hear. "Once I take care of that eyesore being built down the street." At first, I brushed it off as gossip, but curiosity got the better of me. I started digging, quietly. A friend of mine at City Hall owed me a favor, and within a day he called me back with news that made my blood run cold. Margaret had recently filed a business application for a luxury Airbnb property, just 3 blocks from my build site. Everything suddenly made sense. Her obsession, her fake violations, her desperate attempts to shut me down. It wasn't about protecting community values. It was competition. She wasn't fighting for the neighborhood. She was fighting for her own profit. I printed out the documents and held them in my hands, my pulse pounding. There it was in black and white, her name, her LLC, and the address of the property she'd just purchased. She'd been scheming to open her own rental business while pretending to defend the neighborhood from mine. The hypocrisy was staggering. I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. That evening, I posted a detailed community update on our neighborhood's online forum. I laid out the facts, attached the public records, and asked a simple question. If our HOA president truly cares about the neighborhood, why is she secretly building her own rental business while harassing mine? The post exploded overnight. Dozens of comments poured in. Neighbors who had once been neutral now furious that they'd been lied to. So that's what this was about, one wrote. All this drama just to kill competition, another said. By the next morning, Margaret's spotless reputation was in ashes. The board scrambled to contain the backlash, deleting posts and locking threads, but it was too late. The truth was out, and the community had turned against her. When I saw Margaret that evening, she didn't speak a word. She just glared at me from her car as she passed my construction site, her face pale and tight. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control, and she knew it. But even then, I could feel the storm brewing. Exposed and humiliated, Margaret wasn't going to go down quietly. I could almost sense it in the air, the calm before her final, desperate act. The morning of the grand opening felt surreal. After months of chaos, threats, and endless battles with the HOA, my dream stood tall and complete. A beautiful 2-story boutique hotel gleaming in the sunlight. The stonework shimmered, the glass doors sparkled, and the sign out front proudly read, "The Willow Haven, a local retreat." Guests were already checking in, their laughter echoing through the courtyard. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt alive. The parking lot filled quickly. Local business owners, friends, and even a few neighbors came to support me. The mayor showed up for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, shaking my hand in front of a small crowd. Cameras flashed as he congratulated me for bringing growth and charm to the community. It was everything I had dreamed of, the culmination of all the sweat, fear, and determination I'd poured into the project. But in the shadows of that celebration, the HOA's resentment simmered. Margaret hadn't shown up, though word spread that she'd been seen earlier that morning, pacing outside the community clubhouse. She'd lost face, lost control, and lost the trust of almost everyone around her. The neighborhood forum was still ablaze with comments calling for her resignation. By that evening, as I hosted the first dinner for guests, the backlash against the HOA hit full force. Several board members publicly stepped down, claiming they hadn't known about Margaret's secret rental business. Others openly apologized for believing her lies. Local news picked up the story, running the headline, "HOA President Exposed, Tried to Shut Down Competitor While Building Her Own Rental." When the report aired, I stood in the hotel lounge watching it on TV, surrounded by guests enjoying their meals. Seeing Margaret's photo flash across the screen, staring into the camera, looking furious and humiliated, was almost poetic. She had built her power on control and intimidation, and now the entire town saw her for what she truly was. That night, I walked outside and stood beneath the glowing hotel sign. The air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. From where I stood, I could see the flicker of lights in Margaret's house across the way. The curtains twitched once, and I caught a glimpse of her silhouette. She was watching me. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because the truth was, I hadn't beaten the HOA with anger or revenge. I'd beaten them with persistence, proof, and patience. The town had spoken, the guests were happy, and my dream was real. But deep down, I knew one more act remained. The HOA might have been wounded, but I wasn't finished with them yet. The next morning, I picked up the thick binder of fake violations and harassment letters, the evidence of everything they'd done, and headed to my lawyer's office. It was time to end this once and for all. When I walked into my lawyer's office that morning, the air felt charged, like the calm before a thunderstorm about to break. I placed the thick binder on his desk with a heavy thud. Inside were months of harassment. Fake violation letters, recorded threats, photos of trespassing, and Margaret's incriminating emails. My lawyer flipped through the pages, nodding slowly. "This," he said, tapping one of the letters, "isn't just harassment. It's defamation, abuse of authority, and intimidation. It's time we hold them accountable." Within a week, the lawsuit was filed. The official complaint against the Maple Creek Homeowners Association and its president, Margaret Willis, outlined every act of misconduct. The HOA tried to dismiss it, of course, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was ironclad. Once the story hit the local news again, the court of public opinion turned entirely against them. Neighbors who had once feared the HOA now stood beside me, eager to testify about their own experiences. During the first hearing, Margaret finally had to face me across the courtroom. She looked nothing like the smug woman who used to stroll around with her clipboard and fake authority. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. When the judge read the list of charges, harassment, defamation, and misuse of HOA funds, she flinched. The silence in that courtroom was thick enough to feel. Then came the moment that ended it all. My lawyer presented the evidence of her Airbnb business filing, the one she tried to hide while leading the witch hunt against me. The judge's eyebrows rose. "So," he said slowly, "you attempted to shut down your neighbor's legally permitted business, while secretly building your own competing one?" Margaret tried to speak, but no sound came out. The judge didn't need to hear more. The ruling was swift and brutal. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for harassment and legal costs. Margaret was stripped of her presidency, and her business license was suspended pending investigation. When I walked out of that courthouse, the sun felt brighter, the air lighter. It was finally over. The HOA had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt free. Neighbors waved as I drove back to my hotel. Some even stopped by that evening to celebrate. That night, as I stood on the rooftop terrace of the Willow Haven, lights twinkling across the town, I reflected on everything. What began as a simple dream, a small hotel, a place of peace, had turned into a war for freedom, integrity, and fairness. And somehow, I'd won. Below me, guests laughed softly in the courtyard, the fountain bubbling beside them. Across the street, the once powerful HOA office now sat dark and empty. My hotel had become more than a business. It was a symbol. Proof that no amount of control, lies, or intimidation could stop someone who believed in what they were building. And as the night breeze brushed past, carrying the scent of jasmine and victory, I whispered to myself, "They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was building.